Americans are always concerned about their privacy. We've got a real insightful conversation on that tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Good Friday or Monday evening to you. The reason I tell you that is because, of course, our regularly scheduled air schedule. Did I say that twice? Sort of, kind of. Friday, and Monday through Friday, 7:30 on MyRI TV, unless we have a football preemption that bumps Jeopardy and Wheel. Only happens a few times over the course of the year. 7:30 on MyRI TV and midnight on Fox Providence. On holidays, Channel 12 and Fox like to borrow the show, which is, we're all a family here. So many of you are seeing this program on Monday evening at 10:30, right after the 10 o'clock news. So welcome aboard. On the Friday and or Monday holiday programs, we get a chance to kind of relax and talk about a single issue or two, or at least a concentration of things. And an often guest on this program has written a book that I think is going to be a fascinating conversation here for you if you're concerned about cybersecurity, but more or less your privacy in the midst of all of this. Timothy Edgar has been, again, a multiple guest on this program, and here's his new book. It is called Beyond Snowden, Privacy, Mass Surveillance, and the Struggle to Reform the National Security Agency. That's a heavy lift. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much, Dan.
All right, so now you've been here, I don't know, a dozen times, offering me all sorts of high-level expertise, and now you're one of those book guys, you know. But this is something that's going to be on the top of my reading list, and I'm not just saying it, because this is a narrative, kind of like a first-person account of your experiences in investigating this matter and this Snowden story. But you've got insights on all sorts of things. Give me the cliff note on the review of the book, self-review it, and then we'll dig into some of these really crucial issues.
Sure. Well, I wrote this book because I'd had a unique experience of going from the American Civil Liberties Union, one of our top civil liberties organizations, into the belly of the surveillance beast, into the intelligence community, to review all of these mass surveillance programs to see how we could better protect our privacy. And I did that around the same time as Mr. Snowden was working inside the intelligence community. And I talk a little bit about my experiences of how difficult it was to have that kind of conversation in the dark. In the last few years. Meaning that we kept many of these programs much too secret. And we're having a more open discussion about them now. And that's really thanks to Snowden, and also thanks to the intelligence community's decision to engage the public on these mass surveillance programs. This is the very beginning of the conversation around privacy and mass surveillance, and what I'd like to do is to talk about how we can actually safeguard our privacy.
Remind everybody what you were doing when the Snowden thing hit.
So I was just wrapping up my assignment in government and coming to work at Brown. I expected not to be able to talk about much of what I did.
Your assignment in government was?
To review mass surveillance programs, first at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and then later at the White House. And my job was basically to look at these programs, see what kinds of privacy safeguards they had, and see what we could do to improve them. So many of the safeguards you heard about that the government talked about after Snowden revealed these programs were safeguards that we put in place.
We being?
Big team of lawyers at the intelligence agencies and also at the White House, trying to get these programs under court review at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and also trying to make sure that they had the appropriate kinds of audits and safeguards. And one thing I talk about in the book, which I was surprised to learn about when I came to Brown, is the importance that Providence has in the history of mass surveillance. There was actually an important appeal here when Judge Selya was the head of the appeals court for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I talk about that in one of the chapters in the book.
Okay. So much to do in discussing this. Good guy or bad guy, Snowden?
I think it's complicated. What he did was reckless, and it certainly had damage to our national security, but ultimately the outcome has been to shed a lot more light on these difficult issues of privacy and mass surveillance. And so I think that he actually in some ways strengthened the NSA by allowing it to tell its side of the story and to get its house in order and to get the laws reformed. And that's not just my view. As I talk about in the book, there are a lot of national security experts who have said some of those things publicly, and even more have said them privately to me.
So, in the pre-Snowden, and you're in this mix, Is there a feeling amongst the security and cybersecurity and intelligence world that we're sitting on kind of a way too dark time bomb here? Was there a consciousness to what Snowden was thinking and saying? Was this the murmur at the coffee tables and the water coolers about how the world really needs to know what in the heck we're doing here?
Up to a point, that's true. We understood that the internet and the existence of these kinds of bulk collection of data programs were changing the world. And we were really struggling with how to adapt the American system of checks and balances, of respect for the rule of law, to this kind of new world of mass surveillance. Where we fell short, I think, is that we didn't understand how the public, not just in the US, but around the world, was going to react to these kinds of programs. We thought, you know, we had looked at them, we'd tried to make sure that they fit within the parameters of existing laws, and we thought that was good enough. And it turns out that wasn't good enough because our laws were out of date. Our laws just didn't reflect the massive amount of data that's out there and that was available to the government to use for intelligence purposes.
Well, what have we done? Remind me, what have we done via the law to adjust to this, you know, whistleblow that Snowden brought and all the changes that are occurring here?
Well, we've done three things. The first is much more transparency around these programs. After Snowden revealed so many of these mass surveillance programs, the government went ahead and declassified thousands of documents from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, from other legal documents explaining how they worked. So that's number one. Number two, Congress ended the bulk collection of domestic American telephone records. That was a big deal back in 2015, and replaced it with a newer system which actually works a lot better, gives the government access to more data rather than less without having to collect everyone's records. And then the third thing is that President Obama put in place new reforms to protect the privacy not just of Americans, but of everyone around the world. And he did that basically because our allies were upset, but also because American technology companies were really upset about having their global marketplace dominance threatened. A lot of their competitors were saying, hey, don't use these American companies. They're going to give your data to the NSA. And all the government could say is, well, we have rules to protect Americans. And that didn't help. So Obama put in place some new rules, some relatively modest, but actual rules to protect the privacy of everyone in the world.
So does that mean that it's a double-edged sword, that these changes have come along offering more transparency and less intimate surveillance? Does that make us less safe or more safe?
Well, what's interesting about it is it really makes us more safe, because it turns out that these kinds of privacy protections are good for national security. They focus the attention of the agencies on the data that they actually need. It gives them an ability to have greater public support and greater support from companies, from other foreign governments. And so many of these changes that were made in the past few years, which people were nervous about inside the intelligence community, turned out to strengthen our national security, gave them access to the data they needed without having all the problems that they had had before with the excessive secrecy.
I think a lot of people are, myself included, are informed enough about the Snowden story to kind of know, you know, the cover and maybe a half a chapter in. You're narrating a whole bunch of detail here, and it's a first-person approach. So what are you trying to accomplish?
What I'm trying to accomplish is to let the public into this conversation that's been happening first inside the intelligence community in top secret rooms, and then among some specialists in this area over the past few years. I want the public to be engaged in debates about our privacy, about these kinds of mass surveillance programs. And the only way I could think of as someone at Brown, I felt, well, I have this opportunity to write a book which explains how these programs work.
Did you need authorizations, permission, winks, nods, handshakes in order to put this dossier together?
As a former employee, I had to have this book cleared just like any other former employee. I was surprised at how little they asked me to change anything in this book, and that is because of the new transparency we've had over the few years. Much of what I talk about in this book prior to 2013 would have been classified at the highest levels. But now we can talk about it freely. We can talk about exactly how these programs work, where data is collected, how they sift through it, and how they protect privacy or how they fail to protect privacy. And you can make your own judgment about what further reforms you think we might need.
So, yeah, I think everybody likes a good spy novel every once in a while. I'm not so sure you're going to get, you know, Robert Ludlum drama here. At the same time, those who have that kind of appetite and those who are just kind of worried or interested about, you know, who's watching me, must read, right?
This is going to give you the real story about how the NSA and the intelligence community work. It's not always the same as you see in Hollywood, and part of that is because they don't always have access to everything at their fingertips all the time. It's a painstaking process of gathering massive amounts of data and sifting through it and analyzing it.
So I just got my copy. It's going to be on the top of my reading list. Let me ask you this. After reading this, will I and everybody else who reads it, and I hope so many of you do, and by the way, you can pick up a link to find the book on foxprovidence.com, will we feel better or worse after reading this?
Well, I hope in some ways you'll feel better that our government does take seriously the laws and the Constitution. Worse in the sense that those are so far out of date. We have so much more to do to bring them into the digital world, into a global world of mass surveillance.
The Constitution, the statutes, the law, always catching up to the technology.
That's right. And many of them were written back in the days of J. Edgar Hoover, back in the days of analog telephones, and we're still in the process of trying to adapt them to the digital age.
Does the digital age change the concepts of security significantly, or just the platform and mechanisms?
It changes both concepts and details. And I think part of the problem is we've been stuck in the details, and we haven't been able to step back, as I try to in this book, and think about what kind of world are we really trying to create. One thing I talk about in the book is the idea that, you know, surveillance, you can't divide it into neat categories of domestic and foreign, even though our laws try to do that. Much of our surveillance is transnational. It's looking at threats across the world. It's looking at people across the world and data that is traveling all over the world in different ways. And so how do we adapt our Constitution, which protects us in the United States, to that kind of global age?
All right. The book is Beyond Snowden. Get it. When we come back, I always check in with Tim on some current issues. Security. Harvey is a security issue. Stay with us. I mean, what a mess. And of course, you know, Beaumont, as we record the program Thursday, our Friday shows are always recorded on Thursday, and some of you are seeing this on Monday as well on the holiday. Hopefully by the time you're watching this, this water has subsided significantly. On Thursday, the hospital in Beaumont lost water, the whole town lost water. Incredible. I always check in with you on security issues. What do you worry about? I mean, obviously we worry about this, but what's the bigger security implication here?
Well, there's a lot of security implications to extreme weather events. Many of them we think are connected to climate change in one way or another. But with Houston, fourth largest city in the United States, oil refineries, you know, potentially being affected, the economy being affected. But you know, we're also worried about how well our first responders do. Are they sharing the information they need? Are they doing better than they did during Katrina? That was obviously a huge black mark for the Bush administration. So,
well, so far it feels like FEMA is on its game. I mean, there have been no real-time poor reviews.
Well, yes, I think it's far too early to know how we can grade the response to this hurricane. Obviously, Houston is also a very different city than New Orleans, and hopefully we've learned some of those lessons from Katrina. So, you know, I certainly hope and pray that our first responders are, you know, given the equipment and the support that they need to get all of those people the help that they need over the next not just months or weeks, but probably years.
In the meantime, we've got, you know, all sorts of other things that are understandably and probably reasonably buried, or at least second, third, and fourth in the national conversation under the coverage of Katrina. This Trump-Russia thing just keeps rearing its head, and I think if we didn't have the storm, we'd had headlines like this that would, I think, dominate the conversation. And I always like to get Tim's security/political analysis here, since he's been in that White House environment, not just, investigating beyond Snowden. This is more than percolating. These conversations about potential building in Moscow and all of this kind of thing. What's your take on the current status?
I think it's extremely serious for President Trump and for all of his associates. We just see more and more evidence that there are connections between Trump officials and officials in Moscow, and now we have a motive of trying to get a business deal done. Trump Tower in Moscow, that's a big thing. I mean, we're talking about potential corruption as a motive for interference in our elections in 2016. And I think that both Robert Mueller and also Congress need to take an extremely close look at all of this and figure out whether there were any impeachable offenses by the president, whether there are things we can do to rein in conflicts of interest. I mean, this is a massive issue that needs all the attention it's getting.
Well, here's the interesting thing about it for me. I've been thinking long and hard about this as to whether we're overplaying this Russia thing. And it seems to me that Donald Trump continues to be his own worst enemy, because America voted for him knowing that he was multinational. And the idea that he would have interest in Russia shouldn't have, commerce in Russia should not have been a shocker for anybody. That he denied it and continues to seem to kind of try to bury the story, and we have to subpoena and or call for in hearings or possibly indict and or grand jury out some of this stuff, is really what's dragging this thing away. I think, full disclosure, yeah, you know what, I said during the campaign that I had no interest in Russia, I had no project in Russia. I should have said, yeah, just coming real clean with this, I think, would diffuse a lot of the concern, and then we could evaluate it for its net worth. I'm not sure where that would go, but the drama of this seems to be the lack of cooperation and denial that anything occurred.
That's absolutely right. In the intelligence community, when we're looking at new applicants, at people that are working for us, we want to examine very, very closely their financial records, what kinds of business dealings they have, what kind of investments they have. And the reason we do that is not because there's necessarily anything wrong with having business dealings, but because you want to do a thorough check. You want to understand where the pressures might be. And I think that Donald Trump's failure to come clean last year and his continuing insistence that he wants to retain these business connections, that he wants to keep his tax returns and other financial records secret from the public, just fuels all these suspicions. And what he needs to do is he needs to finally listen to the counsel of ethics lawyers and others who've said this is a big deal, and to have this kind of president with these kinds of connections, as president, you need to take steps to insulate yourself from foreign influence.
Well, it seems, I don't know that the Joe Aprile thing is necessarily in your wheelhouse, but when you talk about getting ethics and legal counsel, it seems to me that overall this president could give a flip about even due process. While the presidential pardons are a wide power, traditionally, customarily, the executive branch has kept it to the end of term, had at least a philosophy for the most part for most of the pardons. This seemed to be a 7-month in, I'm going to change the nature, A, of the Justice Department, B, I'm going to jump in the middle of even a conviction and sentencing period. I mean, the guy hadn't even been sentenced yet. Probably wouldn't have gone to jail, actually. Now we'll never know. This is a president just doesn't seem to want to take that advice on any level, correct?
That's right. And look, this pardon of Joe Arpaio was really unforgivable for a lot of reasons, but I think the main reason is you had a sheriff who was essentially abusing people's rights. I mean, someone who talked about, bragged about setting up a concentration camp, his tent camp of detainees, who ignored the orders of federal courts to cut it out and stop it. And then President Trump basically gives him a free pass, immunity, for someone who was in trouble because he had been violating the Constitution. And that really strikes at the heart of our checks and balances. And one of the things we've all taken some comfort in, I think, is we say, well, regardless of President Trump's rhetoric, we know that there's checks and balances, there are courts, there's the Congress, but this really kind of strikes at the heart of that. Obviously, it's within his power, but it seems to me to be a clear abuse of that power when you're talking about pardoning somebody like Sheriff Arpaio.
Yet I don't think the general public is as checked in on this as perhaps, I think the storm probably affects a lot of the focus. But there's a very high quotient, not a majority, but a high minority quotient of support for this because there's a conceptual immigration battle going on. People aren't digging deep into what's going on here, right?
Right. Well, this was, of course, I mean, Sheriff Arpaio is not being convicted for enforcing immigration law. He's being convicted for ignoring the orders of a federal court as to how he goes about and runs his office.
They're kind of kindred spirits in a way.
In a way, they are, and it does give us a great deal of pause when we think about the kind of havoc that a president could wreak when it comes to the investigation of Robert Mueller into the Russia connection.
Meanwhile, North Korea keeps burping. We'll take a minute on that when we come back. Stay with us. All right, so missile fires over the northwest of, northwest of Japan, anyway, the north of Japan. And, you know, there's a lot of reading out there that I've done that suggests that this is not as unpredictable as one would say. This is what Kim Jong-un has said he's going to be doing, and it might be prep for Guam, no matter what the threats are. The president says, you know, that this is not something you want to respond to with chatter. Yet the defense secretary says there's plenty of diplomatic options here, and the secretary of state says the president speaks for himself. So where do you think this all goes? We got 90 seconds to solve North Korea here.
Well, it's very worrying, and I think we're, again, worried greatly about the nature of President Trump and his stability. When you have people like my old boss, Director of National Intelligence Clapper, questioning, you know, whether the president can be trusted.
Did you gulp?
I did a little
bit. Was so direct about his worry about his competency.
I did a little bit. I mean, there were stories in the past about President Nixon being drunk and people saying you shouldn't necessarily listen to what he has to say. That doesn't work in our constitutional system. We have one commander-in-chief, and the fact is he has those nuclear codes, and we all sort of stay up at night wondering whether he's going to use them in some fit of pique.
What is a worry worse, Kim Jong-un himself or our own president?
Well, I think Kim Jong-un is obviously the dictator of you know, a terrible communist dictatorship, and is the concern that we have. But we would hope that we have a more stable response that would use all of our tools, including diplomacy is one of the tools that we use, and we use it with many very, very nefarious regimes, not just with the people that are our friends.
Again, I remind you the book that you should be putting on the top of your list. Beyond Snowden, Privacy, Mass Surveillance, and the Struggle to Reform the NSA. I'm betting it's a pretty good read and worthwhile for your world perspective and your worries about security. Good work.
Thank you.
He's over at Brown, teaching away. Final word when we come back. You know, time flies when we're having fun. Coming up the week after Labor Day, for those of you watching Friday, it's next week. For those of you watching Monday, it's this week. This week will mark the 4th anniversary of this show. Wow. Believe that, Kev? It is hard to believe they put a fat guy on television for this long. Anyway, we've had fun, and we're going to have more fun. We'll see you tomorrow on the radio, too, at 3 on WPRO. Bye.